Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Runners Roundtable, where in season 2, I'm talking to different female run coaches. And today I am joined by Shelby Schmidt. I am so excited to talk to you because you definitely embody the idea that being a runner is more than just running. You took entry into this sport and then you created a podcast with it and you're having discussions. So I just want to say thank you for that, because part of why I'm doing these episodes is not only to speak to different female run coaches, but also to highlight the fact that being a runner is more than just lacing up the shoes and running. Even for myself, yesterday, I had this realization of, oh, I'm such a runner. And it's not because I ran, but it's because of my involvement in the community, or it's because of how much I think about running, or because of how much running has changed my life. It's not that I actually laced up my shoes and ran 5 miles. There's so much more to it. So before we go on and talk about how you came to the podcast and your work there, tell us your running story.
So I always laugh and say my running story starts like so many of ours. I thought that runners had their life together and it was this magical fix all. They get up early. They're so athletic. And it's just like they know what's up in the world. They know what's up with life. And while some of that might be true, I would like a refund on the whole I have my life together part, because it's still not even remotely close. But quite frankly, I started running to lose weight. I knew I was going to be wanting kids. I had a stressful job at the time, and I just was not taking care of myself. And I did sports growing up, but nothing that ever kind of stuck. It was kind of the atypical, like, oh, I'm going to try this because my friend's doing it. And oh, I'm going to do this. And I was the person in PE or gym class, whatever you like to call it, that was like, I have to run the mile. Like, why do we have to do this test? I don't understand it. And especially I'm in Florida, so it was hot all the time, which still, I don't quite get that logic, but that's a rant for another day, I guess. But yeah, I started running to lose weight, and throughout the different seasons in my life, it's stayed with me. And obviously, because I'm here, it's definitely evolved into much more than that idealistic picture.
Where in Florida are you?
I'm in South Florida. So it's not like I'm in the northern Florida where it gets cool, even though right now we're having a quote unquote cold snap. Don't slide into my DMs and hate me for that terminology.
That's why I asked, because I'm in Miami. Like
Okay. I'm north of you.
Yeah. So for me, I've been enjoying these days, and I do feel guilty when I'm like, oh, it's cold, or I'm wearing my sweater and my puffer jacket. Like this morning, I had a puffer jacket on, and I'm like, it's 50 degrees. I feel so pathetic, but
it's true.
It is. It's the cold weather for us is very, very different from other people. And I agree with you on the mile, particularly here in South Florida. And I feel like I remember when I was in school and I had PE, I either wanted PE to be the first class of the day, where it was first thing in the morning, or the very last class of the day, so that I can do PE and then go home and shower. But no, that never happened. I always kind of got stuck somewhere in between. And it was that where it's like, it is really, really hot. And are we even factoring how hot it is when we're telling people to go out and run a mile, or kids to do a mile? And I mean, kids are really resilient, so it's fine. But I'm the same way as you. Yeah, I'm the same way as you, where I was like, no, this is not. So that's why I say too that it's running is something that finds you when you're like ready to be found, because I didn't start running until I was 28 years old. And it was, people should know the story at this point, but it was because of my daughters that I really wanted them to see active womanhood and active lifestyle. And eventually it morphed into something that was for me. So what was that process like for you coming into the sport to lose weight, and where you are right now? Because I'm going to assume running no longer has that connection for you of like, oh, you're doing it to lose weight. I'm going to assume that there's something bigger for you. So what was that transition like for you, or that evolution?
And that's a perfect way, I think, to describe it, is definitely an evolution, and something that even to this day continuously changes. If my answer today could be vastly different than it could be in 6 months, because that really is the beauty. And I think my biggest takeaway from running is the fact that nothing does stay the same. And we always talk about the why in running, like why we do this. And I've not yet met a runner that it doesn't change from season to season, month to month, year to year. But yeah, so I started to lose weight and I was like, I'm going to do a 5K. That's going to be the pinnacle of my running career. And then I'm like, then I'll shut it down and find something new. And again, I laugh because we always joke, like, never say never, but it really is true, because in running, you think one way, then you do it and you're like, okay, maybe I can go a little bit longer. So I did a 5K. I ran up until I got pregnant with my daughter, and I couldn't run while I was pregnant for a multitude of different reasons. But I waited a full year after having my daughter to even run again. I just gave myself that time to get used to having a small human depending on me for life, which, just little things. But I got back into it, and it was like a friend holding out their arms and giving me a warm hug. It made me feel just like me, and something that I'd never experienced before when it comes to movement. And like you had said, it wasn't about, quote unquote, losing the baby weight or getting back to my pre-pregnancy. I can't lie and say that part of me didn't want to be active again to be healthier and to feel good in my skin, but it wasn't the driving force. I just missed running. And after getting back to myself, deciding to leave my previous job, just due to the amount of stress and the toll it took on my mental health, combined with the pandemic, because again, I don't think we'll stop talking about that for a while, and the effects it had on all of us, both mentally, physically, emotionally. And I decided that I didn't want to just run and talk about running and not maybe try to bring that light and that joy to other people who, like myself, and from what it sounds like for you too, it wasn't something we grew up with. We didn't do track and field growing up. We didn't do cross country. It wasn't our thing. And I again found running in my 20s. So it's made up most of my quote unquote adult life. And I use quote unquote a lot because it's like, let's take it easy with the words, because I still don't feel like an adult. Like, whoever gave me an adult card, I'd like to see their credentials before they just handed those out like candy.
Yeah. I mean, like I was telling you before we started recording, my daughters are going to be 13 and 11 in February. And I don't feel like I'm quote unquote old enough to have children that big. Like there are days where I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I really don't know what I'm doing with my life. I don't know, even now, still kind of questioning of like, who am I? Who am I becoming? And somehow I have children and I'm kind of helping them and guiding them. And it's like, no, I really don't know. And it's great because I don't think that feeling ever goes away. My
Right.
dad, we had, oh gosh, this was like months ago. And he's telling me the story of how when he was a teenager, he had an uncle who was 30. And as a teenager, he thought his uncle was so old. He was like, oh, 30, so old. And that there was such a dissonance when he was finally 30 that he was like, wait, this isn't old. Like, this doesn't feel old. So I totally hear that, because it is kind of weird. I mean, and I don't know if everyone has that level of awareness of kind of understanding themselves in time, but then also in relation to other people. But it is a very, very strange thing. I love how you said that running made you feel like you. What is it that what part of running makes you feel like you?
So many things. I run because I love how strong my body feels. Like, even if I have a really cruddy run and my pace is nowhere near where I think it should be or where the Instagram person next to me is, it's one of those to where my body's carrying me through those miles. And I really do love when they say It doesn't matter if it's a 20-minute mile or a 5-minute mile, it's still a mile. Like, your body is so strong, regardless of how you cover distance. If you're not even running at all, maybe somebody's listening to this and being like, I walk. That's totally fine in my book. I think the key takeaway is that movement is magical in so many ways. And I do it for my mental health, my physical health, to have that alone time. I can't deny that being a mom has definitely shaped my running in a whole different aspect. Like you said, not only to show a good role model, an active role model, and hoping to rewrite the societal narrative that we have to work out or run or move to look good. I want it to be that I'm breeding the belief that no, it's to feel good. It's to be good. It's to take care of yourself, mind, body, and soul. And it's just, I mean, I even wrote like a love letter to running because I didn't know how much it would affect my life, not even on a career level, because now I'm lucky enough to be in the running industry in a couple different facets, but it's made me a better person, because even when my anxiety is sky high and I'm like this close to just yelling from the rooftops, I can go for a run, and it doesn't solve everything. It's not the cure-all, end-all, be-all that we would hope it would be. But it does give me that forced break. And I say it often, sometimes physically exhausting myself helps take the edge of the mental exhaustion that I do feel, because life's hard. It's not all peaches and rainbows and sunshine as much as I really wish it was. But it's that one time to where I'm not mom. I'm not Coach Shelby. I'm not wife. I'm not daughter. I'm just me. And for the most part, no one really gives a darn what I'm doing. As long as I'm running, I'm just Shelby. And sometimes I don't even have to be that. I can just be another runner out there getting some miles in, and that's enough for me.
I love that, because that was something that I felt like it took me a while to be able to like synthesize into words. Because again, I started running when I was 28. And at that point, I had a 2.5-year-old and a 6-month-old. And I had no clue what I was doing. I picked running because it was the thing that I could do with the kids in a stroller. Like, that was the one thing I could do with them that was outside at any time, right? You know, when you have little kids, I couldn't go to classes because I didn't have the supports of anyone watching my kids, but I could put them in a stroller. And, you know, Craigslist, thank you, because that's where I got my double stroller, the double jogging stroller. And for the longest time, that's kind of what propelled my running of, I want to show them this. I want them to grow up. And now at this point, it's been almost their entire lifetime where I've been the runner. Like, it's just something that I do. But at some point in all of that, it definitely transformed for me as well, where I realized, oh, running is this space where no one's going to tell me what to do. No one's going to tell me how I look. Like, you know, like, I feel like there's so much that we get told how to be or how to do, that running was that one place where I could show up as I wanted to show up without any commentary from people. Changes a little bit because, you know, in the beginning I did run walking. So that was where my annoyance came in. When I took my walk breaks, people would be like, come on, you can run, you're good, go. And it's like, no, but this is intentional. I'm hoping that is kind of changing within the running community and at racing events. But that was something that for me, and I remember like very vividly, there was one day where I was like, running is awesome because I can wear what I want and no one's going to comment on what I'm wearing. Because normally at this, you know, the further I got into running, obviously my kids got older, and my oldest daughter, she would always be like, Mommy, you're wearing that. You're wearing that. But when it was the running outfit, she never said, it was just like, okay, Mommy's going running, like, you're good. Now for me, it's the same, where now I basically look like I'm going to work out at any point in time. So there isn't that much commentary. But I remember feeling something very similar of, okay, running is where I go to be me, but then it's also where I go to experience some freedom of No one's going to tell me how fast to go, how far to go. Obviously, if you have a coach, like those are suggestions that your coach gives you. But for the most part, it's you doing the work for you and showing up for yourself. So to go back a little bit, how did you make that shift in your life from being a recreational runner, everyday runner, to someone who is immersed in the running industry as much as you are?
It really was a lot of really random micro steps. Again, during the pandemic, I left my job. I was in the mortgage industry and very high stress, just something that my dad has done and continues to do currently. But I couldn't stay on that type of stress level for so long. I realized that it was really just not healthy for me. And I was like, you know what? I've always thought about becoming a run coach, so why not? And at the time, there were no classes available with the RRCA. And during the pandemic, though, they at least moved it to online. So I joined every wait list. And I remember sitting there and emailing and being like, okay, if I can get my local run group to host, like, can I get a spot? Like, da 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 da. And I basically just annoyed them, I think, so much that they're like, okay, like, just get on the wait list. You'll have to wait. You got to get a spot. Finally got a spot. And I remember feeling like such an imposter because I went in, I think, thinking that every coach had to run like the elites, and trying to listen and learn and then figure out, okay, how am I going to be myself, do good, make a living, and do all of these things. And from where I started to now, there's a lot in between. I did my own coaching business. I did that and then worked for an audio-based running app. And then that company shut down and I was left with, what am I going to do next? Where am I going to go with this? And that's how the podcast actually came about, because one of the other coaches and we melded really well. And she, like both of us, was not a born and raised runner. And we're just like, we want to work together. What are we going to do? How are we going to keep ourselves going, the community? Like, what are our next steps going to be? Like, are we just going to go back out on our own? There was so many questions, and you'll find that one question is not my strong suit. It quickly just goes into 15 other ones. But I think in all of it, all of those little micro challenges helped make me a better runner, a better coach. And it's really fine-tuned what I want to do within the running space. And I'm not lost on the fact that the adage of, oh, just put on your shoes and go out for a run is not a realistic thing for so many people for so many reasons. Whether it be that inner voice that's telling you can't, outward voices telling you that you're crazy for doing this. Maybe it's, there's so many barriers, geographically, racial, your physical ability. There's so much to unpack, which I always buck up against people saying that doesn't have a place in the running world. And I'm like, that's exactly where these conversations need to happen. And I'm not blind to the fact that I am privileged. I am just a little white girl in Florida that has not experienced even a quarter of what a lot of runners have faced. But I do know, even on the smaller scale, what I've faced as not looking like the atypical runner or running the paces like people expect me to. So if I can even try to open up the conversations and be part of the change within the running industry, maybe that good can breed change on a grander scale. Because at the end of the day, I'm a running coach. And while I hold that in highest esteem, I know that that's not the end all be all. But if just one section can change, if us as a running community and a running world can make people feel welcomed regardless of all the else, then that's something worth putting the work in for.
I agree, because and you mentioned it, and I feel like it's weaved into that, right? For the longest time, people thought that you could only have a running coach if you were an elite athlete. And like, that's part of what we have to break down, that it's no, your running coach is actually more of a resource than that. You don't have to be an elite athlete to have a running coach. You don't have to do races to have a running coach. So I think I'm going to ask you before I give my opinion, but what, in your opinion, is the biggest benefit to having a running coach?
I always say it's somebody's in your corner. My job as a running coach is to make your running fit your life. It is not the other way around, because most of us listening and most of us getting out there, we don't actually depend on our running for our livelihood. There is nothing specifically tied to where if we don't hit X amount of pacing, we're going to lose a sponsor, or we're going to not be able to renew a contract. Our running is for us.
Mm-hmm.
My daughter, my work, my everything does get put in front of my running. It just does. But as a coach, it's my job to facilitate how running can fit within. So it's not an or, it's an and. And if that means changing a long run day, okay, let's figure that out together. And in general, my coaching style is very collaborative. I'm not going to be the coach that's going to sit there and say, you have to do this above all else. I don't care that your water heater broke. I don't care that your kid's sick. Like, you need to go out and run. That's just not me. Not to say there's anything wrong with that. Some people absolutely respond to that better. That's just not how I approach running.
Yeah, and that's the, kind of going back to what I said earlier, right? Where it's this idea that to be a runner is more than just running. To be a runner is, and I love that you said it's an and, not an or, because I say it often where it's like running is something you add to your life. Like, you are adding this experience, you are adding this movement modality to your life. And it really does have to make sense if you are going to do it for the long term, right? Like, if you're coming into this sport and you just want to do one race, which I think that's the funny part of it. Like, going back to what you said about the 5K, where I feel like that's a lot of people's experiences, where they're like, oh, I'm just going to do this one race and then I'm done. And there's something that happens in the training for the race. Maybe you don't go back to that distance, but you definitely stay within the sport, or at least aware of the sport. But I love that you include that running has to fit into your life. When you're working with your athletes, what is that conversation like with them, right? And I'll give an example, and then you can kind of walk us through how that conversation would go. So you have an athlete that comes to you and they tell you, oh, 5 months from now, there's this series of races, and it's either the marathon or the half marathon. And I always pick the biggest distances because, the biggest distances require a lot of us. So if you have someone that comes to you and they're like, I'm in between the marathon and the half marathon, what does that discussion look like between you and the athlete?
My first question is, okay, so we have 5 months. What does this next 5 months look like in your life? Are you going to be moving? Are you switching jobs? Is your kid going to be starting a new, like, pickleball something or another that's going to require you to be there 3 days a week? And if those questions are, yes, I'm moving. Yes, I'm getting a new job. Yes, I'm doing this. I'm going to say, okay. So with all that, knowing the time constraint like a marathon takes, do you realistically believe that you will be able to be disciplined enough to go in the morning when there's no other option, go at night when there's no other option? And there's no shame with those questions. And I always preface that with all of my athletes. I'm not asking these to put shame on you. I'm asking because you know your life better than anybody. And if your immediate reaction is, I have no freaking clue, let's go through a couple scenarios. Give me your honest answer. And if the honest answer is that you are already so severely overwhelmed that it's taking any excitement out, go to the half marathon. And I'm a big proponent of putting the conversation in the athlete's lap and having them talk back to me and sifting through, okay, is it just nerves? Is it just the fact that you're worried in general? And kind of working backward and taking their answers. And a lot of times it's like, okay, we don't need to decide right now. Most of the time, races do not sell out within 5 minutes of opening, other than like a
Right.
Run Disney, or if there's a qualifying standard, if we're going into different barometers. Most hometown marathons, you realistically probably could wait till the month before signing up. So a lot of times I'll even say, let's see. Let's start training. Let's get your miles in and go from there, and make X date the time where we decide and recheck in if the half marathon or the marathon is a goal, or if we know that one's going to be better over the other. And taking the dire finality of, I have to pick this race, I have to pick this distance because that's going to prove something to somebody else other than myself.
Yeah. So kind of let's go back on, let's actually, can we follow that particular thread? Because you said something earlier too about the comparison to social media and whatnot. How do you have that discussion with your athletes? And, an example I like to give is, oh, your athlete comes to you and they're like, I saw that so-and-so on social media did this workout and I want to do this workout. How do you have that conversation? Because I think running is such, the physical act of running, it's just so wonderful. But the fact that we're based on metrics of pace and distance and stuff like that, I feel like it harms us at times, especially when it links into comparison, right? Of you seeing yourself and then comparing yourself to another athlete. And even something like that of, okay, do you want to do this for you, or are you doing this because everyone else is doing it, right? Like you're kind of jumping on the bandwagon. So how do you have that conversation with your athletes in terms of, I don't know, helping them gain a little bit more clarity, or even, again, going back to what you said earlier of like understanding what their why is for doing what they want to do or what they say they want to do?
And that's exactly, I put it right back and I say, okay, why? Like, is it because you want to test yourself? Is it because you want to prove something? And most of the time you can tell pretty instantaneously if people are kind of dancing around or running around the true meaning of the why they want to do it. And I like having that open conversation. I do draw a lot from my own experiences. I have run a marathon. It hurt like all get out because my training cycle quickly fell apart. I'm very transparent that my own running is in a very weird season of times. And again, it's like, this is a safe place. It's okay to be honest and say, I want to run a marathon because I want to prove to others that I'm a real runner. And it has so many follow-up questions of, okay, looking at other paces or other races that they've done, other distances. Are they jumping from the 5K to the marathon? Are you coming off of doing a couple half marathons and you want to do the marathon and you want to push yourself? And touching on what you said about the comparison game, I've found most recently, most runners are stuck in the comparison trap of themselves, of what they ran 2-3 years ago. Self-included, guilty as all get out.
Oh,
I had
absolutely.
That time hop is not my friend at all. I don't know why they invented it. I want to have a very strongly worded letter as to why anybody thought that was a good idea, especially for runners. Because looking at my paces a year ago, I'm at least probably 2 to 3 minutes on the more conservative side than I was. And I've had to give myself some slack and be like, yeah, but look how much life has happened in between those times. And it's breaking down that it's not an excuse. It's not me trying to make myself feel better. It's just facts. And not letting other people's paces or my own steal the joy of what I'm at now. Because again, if Shelby 10 years ago could look at what I'm doing now, she'd be like, damn girl, like I'm pretty proud of you. And I hope that everybody takes that moment here and actually goes, yeah, you're kind of right. Like if I would look at myself before I started running, I'd probably be pretty darn amazed. So why should today be any different?
Yeah, I love that because it's talk about reframing how we're used to looking at ourselves, right? We're used to looking at ourselves backwards instead of, okay, but let's go back and then look forward. And that is such a beautiful thing to say, because I would say the same thing. And I have to remind myself, and I've said it on the podcast a few times where I'm like, oh, I haven't had a PR since 2016. And it's like, okay, Steph, but let's remember we had a pandemic in the middle of that. A lot of life has happened. A lot of changes have happened. And yeah, if that 2016 Steph were to look forward and see where I'm at right now, she'd be really proud that I stuck it out, that I'm still here trying to do this thing called running, even if I'm not getting the PRs, or even if I'm not seeing linear growth, because that's part of it too, right? Like running is not linear. Your growth in this sport is not linear. You have your highs, you have your lows, you have a lot of plateaus, and it is a constant figuring out what needs to be tweaked so that you can feel your best. And for myself as well, when that comparison to myself comes up, I have to really pause and say, okay, who are you comparing? You're comparing yourself to someone from 2016 that is at this point 7 years younger than what you are, right? Like 7 years younger than what you are. Those PR races that you're talking about, hey, they happened in Chicago, not in Miami. Like even things like that geographically, just different, so different. And also even understanding that, okay, I started running consistently at this level in 2012. So yeah, 2016 for all those PRs makes a lot of sense because I'm learning and I'm going to go up. I'm going to go up as each training cycle comes. So it's also kind of remembering that there is a huge growth spurt when you're first getting into something, because you literally know nothing. Like you don't know what it's like to train. You don't know anything. So it's it is really interesting when we think about ourselves as runners, but also the importance of kind of stepping back. And I think this goes to an unsaid thing of the benefit of having a run coach, or a benefit of having a run coach is being able to put all that stuff in perspective. Because when we get started, and I'm the same way, when I get started, I can't even see any of that stuff because I'm so caught up in my story and of like how I want things to be different and woe is me and all of this. And it takes someone from the outside to be like, hey, can we put pause on those thoughts and see that you have grown, just maybe not in the ways that can be measured by your watch or by a finish time.
Right.
And those are really important. I'm curious, when a runner or an athlete comes to you and they say, I want to be a real runner, or I'm not a real runner. What is that conversation? Because that's been something that I'm so interested in as well, of the barriers we put in place for ourselves when it comes to owning that runner label or that runner identity.
Well, first of all, I want to say hallelujah to the fact, like you said, like for you, the 4 years, like, of course you're going to have PRs. Every race that you run that you've never run before, congratulations, that's a PR. So I think that's really something that isn't actually talked about enough. Like when you're new to running and all of this is bright and shiny and new, you're going to feel like your progress is just blowing it out of the water. You're an elite, you're a goddess, you're just crushing the thing. And you are. And you got to hold on to that feeling when your season of running shifts and you're more of an active student, if you will, and learning running differently. So just first of all, yes to all of that and a bag of chips. But I got so excited by that, I think I forgot the question. Oh, about the real runner.
Real runner.
Sorry. Yeah, my squirrel brain just went, phew. I always laugh because it's probably the only time I've ever really like a hard-nosed coach when somebody says I'm not a runner, because I refer to everybody as runners, as athletes, and really embrace those labels. And I'm like, but you are. I'm like, if you run a step, if you run, walk, if you like half fall and kind of start running, congratulations, you're a runner. I'm going to call you that, even if it makes you uncomfortable, because I think the sooner we embrace that and again, strip back that label of what it should look like, that's when the progress happens. And I think that's most exciting for me when I start working with a new athlete, whether they've been running for a while or they are just finding their stride, is seeing that mental shift. And that's when I know they have the bug. Like when they're really sitting there and be like, okay, this is kind of my thing now. And just seeing them embrace it. And that's a metric that can't be seen on your watch. That's not something that you're going to see on Strava or I'm going to see in your numbers and your reports. That's only going to come from talking with them. And this is where I feel like a running coach is so crucial for so many, whether you are starting out, whether you've been running for 10 years, even if you're shooting for the stars and PRs and BQs and all of that. It's somebody to take out all the noise, all the fluff. Because again, even looking at your metrics, I don't know how much you weigh. I don't really care how much you weigh. I don't care how tall you are. I care that you're okay to run, obviously, that you don't have like an underlying something that we need to address. Like, please include that on your intake form. Right. But I do not care what you look like, where you're from, or anything. All I care about is you as the person, as the runner, and finding a way to make running, again, fit your life and be able to be part of you that brings you joy. And even though there's still days that you're going to say, I have to go for a run, there are days like that. There are days that I still am like, I have to go run. And I'm like, but I know I'm going to want to. Yep. And I text my co-host because she's, awesome, quite frankly, but she's one of those, like, I hear her in my head. And even though she hasn't formally coached me, like, that's what I try to do for my athletes. Like, send me a message and be like, hey, I just ran. Like, it felt like crud, but I ran and I'm going to cheer you, because that one step, figuratively and literally, is only going to have the ripple effect. And you might run one day and then just go for walks for the next 3 days. Okay, why is that a bad thing? You're moving. You're still building that consistency. And there's so much more to running than running. And it always hits me as really hilarious when people do think, like you said, that you only have to run. I'm a huge proponent of run walk, because whether you do that for 20 years or it gets you into it, again, it's that tangible way to get moving. When I'd rather somebody walk for 5 seconds and walk for a minute than not even try.
Absolutely. And I think that's, part of the barriers that we, as people who are already in the community, that's part of what we have to break down, of like, no, just moving your body. That's really what matters here. And I love everything that you said there, because running can transform your life, but we do need to work on getting out of this black and white description of what running is. And for me, it was very simple. I started again, like run, walk. That is how I started. And at some point it shifted into running straight, quote unquote, running straight. And even now it's like, okay, if I need a walk, if that's going to help me get through this run, or if that's going to help me continue on, then I will. And I also want to kind of piggyback on what you said, where the majority of my runs, I don't want to do them. I just don't. And I love this sport. I love that I'm a runner, but the majority of the runs, I don't want to do them. I don't want to get started. It was like, I think it was maybe last week where I came home from a run and my husband's like, how was your race? And I'm like, what are you talking about? This race? Like what? Like this was like a Wednesday, not a Wednesday. I don't run on Wednesday, but it was like a Tuesday or a Thursday. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, yeah, babe. He's like, you're racing against yourself. And I'm like, oh, well, when you put it like that, yes, the race was good. Like I did it, because sometimes it is a race against yourself, in terms of the voice that says, no, don't do it, just stay home. And the voice that says, hey, Steph, remember, you're going to feel great when you finish it. Even if it's a hard run, even if it challenges you, even if you're like cursing or screaming or grunting when you're running, when you finish, you're going to be really proud that you did it. So it was just really funny that my husband said that. And I think it's, again, like just highlighting what you said of, you may not love it all the time, but you are going to love how it makes you feel afterwards. Or even like, I think of the days when I don't run and how I'm like, man, I wish I would have ran. And it's like, who are you kidding yourself? Like, if you had to run today, you would have started off with, do I have to run? So it's this weird thing that we face. I want to go back to what you to something that you had mentioned in terms of people interested in you as a coach. What is that process like? So you said you have an intake form. Are people reaching out to you on your website, on Instagram? Where is it that people are connecting with you? And then what is that intake form like? And is there a consultation? Like, how do you figure out whether someone is a good fit for you as an athlete and you're a good fit for them as a coach?
So I've had people reach out to me via the website. I've had people reach out to me via DM through Instagram. However people feel comfortable, I'm totally okay with. Like, a lot of times I'll get a message like, hey, I kind of want more information, because again, people don't necessarily know what a run coach does. And like you had said, there's the same tools, but we all use them differently. There are some run coaches that are going to be drill sergeants, going to hold you to the highest standard and everything, and that might work for you. My more mindful, laid back approach might not be for somebody else, and that's okay. Just like running straight through might not be for somebody, or a run walk might not be for somebody. But so I always do a initial call. I don't charge for it and anything, but I always do an initial call because you get a feel for somebody by talking to them. I have them fill out the form, and it does go through the nuts and bolts of running, like how long you've been running, if you've been running, current race times that you have had, your goals, your outlook on things, just so I have a loose sketch of the person that I'm going to be talking to before I go into the meeting, because I want to be able to ask those educated questions and to know a little bit of their backstory. But I always like opening up, like, I have the form, but I want to hear about you from your words, because questions on a questionnaire are wonderful. They can provide you a lot of insight. But I mean, maybe I'm guilty of this. I'll spend 30 minutes like answering 2 questions because I'm trying to find the right words, to where when people are on the spot in a nice way to tell me about themselves, you learn so much about what they really want, what they really are craving. And if we're not a good fit, I will be very honest and say, you know what, you seem lovely. I think you have a lot of promise, but I'm not the coach for you, because I'm not going to waste somebody's time, nor I'm not going to waste anybody's money just to make $1. If I don't feel like we're a good fit, I will tell you. To date, I don't think I've actually had to do that, which I'm very proud of, because I think it at least shows that I do show myself who I am, like the good, the bad, and the ugly. Like, I'm not pretending. But if that situation arises, I would gladly give somebody like a reference, or actively like put out to the couple coaching communities I'm in, like, hey, does this sound like anybody's cup of tea? I'd love to at least pass on the information. And even my co-host and I, we joined our businesses together for coaching. And while our philosophies and our ideals are very similar, we still have different ways that we do approach things. And it makes it good because her and I can collaborate and kind of have that think tank to work through problems. And she's given me guidance, I've given her guidance, and it's very cohesive. And even though we are so similar, there's still those little nuggets that make us different enough.
Yeah. What would you, and so before I ask this question, there is, and I don't think people realize this, and I did the same thing where like, I definitely creeped on my coach for a while before I sent her a message and actually had a phone call. So I love that you brought that up where it's like in your experience, you haven't had situations like that, because I think people do, especially now with social media, where, if you're a little more visible on there, if you're sharing more about how you're approaching running and how running, like your relationship to running. Cause for me, it's more that it's like, what is your relationship to running is going to give you so much more information than your race times, to your
Right.
point. And I know for myself that it was that where I had followed my coach for a while, really got a good feel for her. And then we set up a phone call. Like then I reached out. I was like, okay, I want to do this. Let's have a conversation. And the conversation just solidified the impressions I had made based on what I saw online. And again, benefit of social media. That's a benefit of social media. The comparison part, not a benefit, but the being able to get to know people a little bit more before you actually reach out to them, that is a benefit. Going back to something that you said, how would you describe your coaching philosophy?
I really think the only way I could is making running fit your life. I mean, that's the tagline. That's the nuts and bolts of it, because at least what I've found with my own running, if it can't fit my life, I'm not going to do it. And for somebody who's already hesitant to jump into the running world and be a runner, I think that's a very scary thing of that it's going to take over my entire life. And it's going to, but it's a slow roll and it's in a good way, because yeah, there'll be times going forward that if it's between a late night out and your run in the morning, you'll be like, no, I think I'm going to go to bed early and have my run in the morning. I'll meet you for brunch after. And those little buy barter steals that we do with each other, that's where it slowly creeps up on you. And before you know it, you're in a serious relationship with running. And it's basically your side piece, but just in a healthier way, I guess. That's probably really bad to say. Like, I don't mean to offend anybody, but it's true.
I was gonna say that is true, because I think of, I think of my own life and how, depending on the season of running I'm in or what I'm training for, there are more negotiations that I have. So, I've said this before where right now I'm training for a marathon. And when I'm in marathon training, Friday nights, I go to bed, like I'm in bed by 8:30. Like
That's the dream.
9:30 at the, and I tell you the reason this works is because again, my children are almost 13 and 11 years old. Like they can do a lot on their own. So it's okay. And my kids are really good. If I tell them, hey, you can watch TV until 9:30, but then you have to brush your teeth and go to bed, they actually do it. Like they go along with it. But that's one of the things that it is hard when I kind of step back and I'm like, oh, but I'm missing Friday night, family time. And it's okay, but this is only temporary, right? Like this is what we're doing up until this particular marathon is done. And I think that's always something that as coaches, having that discussion with the athletes of like, here are some examples of how your life might have to change in order to accommodate this level of training. For the most part, I feel like people are okay with it. And if they're not okay with it, eventually training is going to make them learn that they have to make those adjustments. But people are usually okay with that. And I wanted to go back to something else that you had said, because it's so true. And I don't think I've ever asked this in all the conversations that I've had, but we can always start somewhere, even if we're 21 episodes in of this series, right? Like we can always start somewhere. In your opinion, what is a run coach?
My first thought, the way to describe it is a friend. It's a friend who gets it, because most of the people don't understand it unless they are a runner. And that's not to make it a whole other section of elitism, but mostly non-runners can't understand why we do this. They can't understand that why missing our run really does make us feel like a big pile of poo. And I don't have runners in my life. My sister does run, but I mean, I don't have friends like in real life, in person friends that run, even though I'm trying to cultivate that. That's part of my 2023 checklist. My husband does not run. My parents do not run. None of them have ever run.
Mm-hmm.
And while they understand that I love it, they still don't understand that underlining fire that comes with being a runner. And how even on those days to where I'm like, this sucks, like, why on earth do I do this? I still will push myself out. And it's to have a running coach, to be in that corner, it really does make all the difference. Because again, they also can pull back all of the excess and be there for you. And even as simple as moving a run, be like, hey, there is no way I can get this run done today. Okay. So I take the stress off my athlete and I'm like, let me rework the schedule so you can run, do it safely. And if that means deleting a run, that's kind of not your choice. That's going to be my choice. And even though I'm not a hard coach, I very rarely say no. Even though one of my runners might disagree with that because she was like, I want to go do a 50K and she got burnt out on a marathon. I'm like, no, hun. I'm like, just no, like, just pause. But it's one of those things to where I, as a running coach, I take the guesswork out because at the end of the day, I will rework it. You can give feedback and I ask for feedback, but you're not having to figure out, okay, should I skip this run? Should I move this run? Should I move this here or that there? That's what I'm for. That's my wheelhouse right here.
Yeah. And I think so that definitely connects to like the messaging I've been putting out there in these episodes. So even though I have not directly asked that question, I've definitely alluded to it where I feel like it's a tagline at this point where it's like your running coach is more than your training plan. Your running coach, yeah, they create a training plan for you, but your training plan is a living, breathing thing that responds and reacts to your life. Nothing is set in stone. If you want a training plan that doesn't move, then yeah, there's enough online. There are enough apps where you can get something either for free or for very, very cheap, but it's not going to take your life into consideration. It's not going to take anything into consideration. And I've said this before, and the first time I said it out loud, I'm like, this might be controversial. But then you said it today, and I'm like, okay, well, actually, it's not controversial because what I've said before is that even a PR from a year ago, like, I'm not going to hold any weight on that because a lot of life can happen in a year's time. Yeah, a year ago, you might have had an incredible PR race, but in that time, you've gotten injured or you've moved or family dynamics have changed. There's so much that can happen in a year that can change who you are as an athlete, both physically and mentally. So I just love that you bring that up, that your coach is a friend that gets it, because your coach is going to be someone that sees all of that and just uses it as context. And where I come with this on that friend piece is also that your coach is going to be one of the only people in your life that will understand not so much the joy of running, but the heartbreak of running. As I think of myself, again, I think of myself where it's like, oh, in my house, everyone knows I don't like marathons, and yet I continue to do them. And I say this, that it's like, I just haven't figured out, like, there's a piece that I'm missing in it, whether it's nutrition, whether it's the rest. Like, I know that there's a piece that's missing because I like to run and I like to run long and I like to just like kind of be out there and chilling out, And everyone in my house, like my husband is always like, but you don't like these things. Why do you keep doing that? Why? Like, I don't understand. And it's like, oh, you wouldn't understand though. Like you don't understand how it is to connect to a movement that does make you feel like you, that makes you feel alive. And for me, the longer the distance that I run, the more I have to confront the ugly parts of me, that when I'm done confronting those parts, I am so proud to be who I am, right? Like And not to say that you don't get that in a 5K, like every athlete is different. But
Right.
for myself, it's very much the longer I run, the more I have to confront the negative self-talk. You can't do this. Why are you doing this? Who do you think you are? And when I finish, I'm like, yes, I am that person that did that. And that's a sense of pride that no one can take away from me. So I love that you say that, because that is a real important part of this relationship between coach and athlete, is that your coach is going to understand you as a runner better than anyone else. Even your running friends, I feel like sometimes, because your running friends will only have certain information, whereas, and I've said this in other episodes too, oftentimes your coach is going to know about stuff that's happening in your life that people, and the example I always give is like a pregnancy, right? Like your coach might find out that you're pregnant before a lot of other people find out, because a pregnancy may affect your running. It may affect
Right.
like you having to take some time off. So I just really appreciated that you brought that point up, because that is something that when we're talking about fitness, whether your coach fits you and you fit your coach, that is a big part of the equation of like, is this someone that I feel like can support me and be my runner friend in this? Is this someone that's going to cheer me on, help me navigate all of this? And also, even deeper to that, is this someone I can trust to take the reins on that part of my running life?
And that's, I think, a great point too, because even though at our core we are friends, we are support systems and everything, it's also really, I think, a crucial point to point out that we are still at our core running coaches. While we are friendly with our athletes, we care with our athletes, we also have to work to keep healthy barriers. The fact that while we are here to support you and to cheer you on, and like you said, to be that confident or confidant, we're not everything at its whole. I am not a therapist. I am not a doctor. I am not, Arnold Schwarzenegger. I still have bounds, and it's very difficult because those lines can often get skewed very easily. And just remembering that at our core, we are run coaches. We are here for you, but you still have to do the work elsewhere. And that's why I always, in every interview I do, everything, I'm always the strongest proponent of running is not therapy. And it can be a great part in your toolkit. And I wish, and I'm an advocate for mental health. I'm an advocate for physical therapy. I'm an advocate for stretching. I'm all of those things. But at the core, I'm invested in your run life balance, your running, your well-being. And if the well-being is not running, then I'm also going to be very transparent with that, because that is my moral as well as professional call. I have to also be comfortable with calling it when I see it. And there's been plenty of times I've told runners, you should not be running right now. And that's a hard thing to hear for a runner. It feels almost like a betrayal, I think, in some. It's like, but you're my running coach. And it's like, yes, I am. And my professional opinion is that you need to take a break for X, Y, and Z reason. And I think it's kind of that unspoken thing that no one likes to talk about. But again, it goes back to taking some of the decisions out of your hands and saying, looking at all the metrics I'm seeing, the conversations we're having, you really need to focus on X, Y, and Z. Let's pause for a second and just take inventory.
Yeah. And I think I'm so glad that you brought that up, because that's something that I'm constantly thinking about. And it's come up in these conversations as well, where it's like understanding your scope, understanding like what are the parameters for you to do the work that you do. And those are difficult conversations, because yes, to your point, runners don't like to be told that they can't run. Like that is actually like really tough to hear. And yet it does take having that difficult conversation. And beyond the difficult conversation, it's one, understanding your scope, but then also being confident in yourself to be like, hey, I think you're a great athlete. I think, like you said, you have potential, you have promise, however you want to phrase it. But right now, I can't coach you under these circumstances. And that is my boundary. And that's part of, even in having these conversations, again, it's always coming back to this reminder for people who are listening that the coach athlete relationship, it is a relationship. It does require trust, communication, honesty, all those things that we cultivate in healthy relationships are in the coach athlete relationship. So I just really appreciate that you brought that up too, because yeah, athletes don't want to hear that they can't run. Athletes, especially when you get hooked with running, yeah, you want running to be that savior, or running does become something else. Like for some people, it might be running is the one thing that is going well in their life, right? Or even again, I'll give myself as an example of in the pandemic, running was that one constant thing I had. Life beyond the run was chaotic, but I had to definitely make sure that I was approaching running in a healthy way that didn't lead to injury, or that I wasn't doing more than what I should be doing, simply because running was a lifeline to staying sane, to feeling like I had control, because that's another part of it, right? Like
Right.
is this space where we can become a little bit of control freaks. So I love that you brought that up, because again, it's highlighting the fact that this is a relationship, and that sometimes there are challenges, not just for the runner, but challenges for the coach as well, because you are a human and you are seeing everything globally, right? You are seeing all of this. Whereas me, the runner, I'm most likely only thinking about today. And
Yep.
like stuff for today, I'm not really stepping back and thinking of, oh, here's the week of runs and here's all of this. And if I told you that I have this, like it's kind of hard to keep all of that into perspective. Again, going back to that, your coach has perspective of all of this. So I really, really appreciate you mentioning that, because we don't do enough talking about in general, not just coach athlete relationship, but the stickier parts of being in community with other humans.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm a softie. I don't like controversy. I don't like setting boundaries in my day-to-day life, nor my professional life. Like I'm not good at it. And it's something I've had to really work on in all aspects. And again, everything I've gone through in my life, I see the parallel with my running. And it's putting up that stop sign in the same token when I'm on the run, being like, don't compare yourself. And how you said about the pandemic, running was the only time I left my house for a very, very long time. I struggled hardcore during the pandemic. I was not the one going to the grocery store. I was not going places. I wasn't going to parks. I ran. That was my outside time. We'd go for walks. I'd go for my runs. And that's what I did. And I'm feeling like, again, we're seeing a lot of athletes that resonate with that. A lot of people picked up running during the pandemic because gyms were closed and everything. And now we are in that really sticky transition time of, okay, the world is, I mean, again, using air quotes here, people, normal. But we can't do these run streaks of just miles upon miles upon miles. Some people can. There's different ways to make it your own, which is a great thing that I've had a conversation with a lot of athletes on, is how to take that run streak that we all know what they are. You run at least a mile a day, and turning them on their heads of, okay, well, maybe I just move for a mile a day, or I make a run streak to where I go for 10 minutes a day, or however we want to phrase it. And making sure that we're not getting into that burnout where a lot of people are struggling right now. And we're having to see a lot of people take time off for burnout, for injuries. And a lot of times that's because people got into the sport with no support, with no backup, with no actual knowledge. And again, the bad part about social media is everybody has a page, everybody has an opinion, whether there's thought or science or certifications behind it is irrelevant. And do I believe that my certification makes it the end all be all? No, I don't. And I'm very blunt with that. However, with my certification, I do have resources. I do have knowledge. I do have a code of ethics and everything that
Right.
I take to heart. Not to say that somebody else doesn't, but to have a support from somebody who has at least gotten some training, has put in the work to get you off on the right foot, or even come back after a break, especially. I feel like sometimes those are the most crucial points where people don't even consider a running coach, where I would argue that's one of the times you actually probably need a running coach the most, when you have no clue what you're doing, or you're trying to rewrite a script of injury or burnout or fatigue. That's especially when I'm like, take the reach out, send the DM, send the email. And if it's the right coach, they're going to be excited you did that. They're not going to shame you.
Absolutely.
And if anybody shames you, that is not the right coach. And I will go on record all day, every day by saying that. If the first thing a coach does is shame you, I'm sorry. See you later. Close the door. I'm not even entertaining that.
Yeah, no, especially, you know, and I agree with that, because it's like, wait, if we're looking to, and this will connect to the final question I have for you, is that if we're looking to grow the sport, then we need to welcome everybody into it, regardless of how they're moving their body. And it's just that simple. So that final question, and you've already alluded to it, or you talked about it a little bit earlier, is how can we make running more accessible and inclusive?
I think, again, elevating runners, walkers, movers of all levels, and not using the word run in such a clinical way, and accepting and truly accepting everybody. And I know that receives a lot of backlash, because it's like, oh, well, the sport is inclusive. Well, it's not. I think it's a fallacy to think that the sport is inclusive, but that doesn't mean that it couldn't be. But again, putting in the work, diversifying who we have on shows, who we have on our Instagram feeds, and who we're choosing to support. There's so many barrier breakers that are happening. And whether that is on the racial front, or attacking ableism and really breaking down the payment in elites. There's a huge disparity between the able-bodied division as well as the para-athlete division. It's something we don't talk about. And I'm still learning. I'm very upfront with the fact that I might misspeak. I might get it wrong. But if I don't continue to do it, how am I expecting anybody else to be open to that? And I always get gun shy because I don't want this to sound like a soapbox, because it's not. I don't have all the answers. I'm very flat out honest with that. But I'm also not shying away that there are people with answers and ideas. And if what I can do is just open my door and say, I'm willing to be part of these conversations, I'm willing to have the uncomfortable conversations, and I'm willing to grow. Okay, step one, how do we keep making those steps moving forward?
Yeah, it's the ripple effect. And I love that, because there is no, with that question, I feel like there's no right or wrong answer. It's more about, are we even asking the question, and are we even talking about it? That to me is like the biggest part of it, where it's like, yeah, it's an uncomfortable question, especially for people who are in the sport and we love the sport. But if we're not having these conversations, and I think back to something like, the whole dream maternity campaign with, against Nike, that was one of those things where I had no clue up until they started talking about it. So it does take a bit of courage to have these conversations, and also to admit, I don't know what the answer is, but I want to be there while we figure it out. Or I don't know what the answers are, but this person is having this conversation about it? Can I amplify them? Can I go into that conversation as well? Because to your point, right, where it's like running is for everybody. And I think a lot of it has to do with dispelling what we think a runner looks like, so that we know, no, runners come in all shapes and sizes, runners come in all abilities. Runner, yeah, if you're that 5-second runner, you're still a runner, but that takes a little more dialogue at every single level within the running community to start breaking down what we think, right? A runner isn't just someone who gets really fast times. And, and I remember again myself where it was very much like, oh, the sub 30, sub 35K, sub 2 hour half, sub 4 hour marathon, like all those things when I first came into the sport, those were like the ideals. Now that I've been in this sport for so long, it's like, no, you're still doing the work. Like there's still something that's getting you from start line to finish line. You're still dedicated in doing all that work. So there shouldn't be this, for lack of a better word, of like hierarchy of runners or hierarchy of movers. If you do it, you do it, and then it should all be celebrated. But we do have to have these discussions really confronting, well, why is this person who runs this time seen as better? Or, when it comes to social media as well, where it's like, oh, they're seen as experts. And it's like, okay, so I get what you're saying, because it's like, yeah, the certification, it adds something, not to say that you know more than another person. And this is where this is my soapbox, particularly with Instagram, where I'm like, people, we need to, everyone just please put an asterisk or put something, make a note that this is based on your experience, what works for you and your body, not something that everyone should try, like at all, and I think of something as an example of like, you have these really fast runners and then they're talking about how they run fasted and how it's the running fasted, that's what helps them. And it's like, okay, like, can we just put a little note? This is what works for me. May not work for you, but this is what works for me right now. So I think it is being open to having the discussions, but then also going into the information you are receiving with curiosity of like, okay, but where is this information coming from? How did they come up with that? Where, what's not necessarily the experience, but just like, where does this information come from? And does it apply to me? What are other people saying about it? Like, it's so layered. Like, I think it's just that it's a very, very layered thing. And I just want to say that, like, I agree with you. It's, you have the conversation, and then guess what? That's going to ripple out into the relationships you have with your athletes.
Yeah. And it is true. And it goes, again, running is a Rubik's Cube. You're not going to get to the solved Rubik's Cube doing the same exact steps as somebody else when it comes to running. Yeah, it might work that somebody runs fasted. I am not one of those runners. I want snacks upon snacks upon snacks, and I don't care who knows it. Like, I always have snacks, and they're not for my kid. They're for me. But it's going back to the same thing of stripping down the stereotype that surrounds running and being okay that we can love the sport and realize that it's still very broken in a lot of regards. And that doesn't mean that we have to love it less. It just means that there's more work to be done.
Absolutely. Beautifully said. Where can we connect with you? And then do you have anything exciting coming up that we can support and cheer you on in?
Well, you can find me. The podcast that I co-host is Time for Brunch with my amazing co-host, Christine. And I'll give you all the links. You can put it in episode notes. Our website is timeforbrunch.com. Instagram is Time for Brunch Podcast. And our mission is to try to make more than just the word community, but to actually live that and breathe that. And we're just in the midst of one of our training groups. We're looking to do another one come the summer because, again, we need motivation just like anybody else. It's hot in Florida. We're both in Florida. Now we know that you're in Florida. And we're doing workshops galore. All the information is on our site, but we're always open for a DM, email, whatever. We're just trying to make the world a little bit of a higher place on and off the run.
I love that. With that, thanks everyone for listening to our conversation, and we'll see you soon. Bye now.